As you know, Ireland has had an incredible reputation in terms of e-learning, and with the river deeps, the smart forces, and all of this type of stuff. About 4 years ago, they came together as a group and said, how can we tap into all of this great research that's going on in Irish universities and research institutes? And they could put on an open call to the universities and said, how can you help us? And thankfully we won the bid for it. And really what we were saying, how can we apply this? And again, this was about 3.5 years ago when I wrote the proposal, or they wrote the response, said how can we apply this advanced thinking to help lifelong learning and ultimately bring it into their product spec so that they can compete better in a very, very competitive and aggressive marketplace with global domination, where if you're just on certain parts of their product offering, it's just on time and materials, that can be shipped, or you can't compete just on costs alone. So it's to help them kind of bring up or access a higher value product and technology so that they can compete and lead in their world. And we also have some very exciting technology transfer of that technology into some of their clients, like Computer Associates, and it's also based on the technology we've done here at the Elite project, now working with Intel on the new project that's just about to kick off. So again, exciting news and optimistic news that this stuff is real, even though I haven't quite explained what that stuff is yet. This thing's on semantics, so bear with me. Again, there is a natural bias within us and within the university down in DERI, which have worked very closely with SMEs. These are some other companies that we're working with. Tourist Republic is based out of the Limerick Clare area. They want to build a recommendation engine, so when I want to go to, say, New York, or I want to go for a weekend away, that the system start doing kind of more information, give me better results. So they're applying semantics to kind of give a better service offering in a very tightly focused niche called tourism, or recommendation engines in the tourist space. Tag Builder out of Cork, these are a bunch of guys I think that worked with Motorola, phenomenal experience both in sales and the technical side around electronic components. You know, if you go into any of the large manufacturers, thousands and thousands and thousands of parts. So how can you make sense of what is what does the SKU number mean here, and then as they change in different manufacturers. So they're going to kind of work with it, trying to get this advanced technology to help make sense of that kind of infinite inventory that's available, but ultimately to sell it on and sell on a better service in terms of product cataloging and in the electronic component space. So again, kind of working closely with the SMEs here to get that advanced technology in, and working closely with Enterprise Ireland in terms of kind of co-funding to make this thing kind of a reality. So now I'll move on kind of more to the main part of the speech. When we look at the web, we need to put it into perspective. And allowing for the fact that my maths may not be perfect up here, the web is about 5,000 days old. And I take 5,000 in that, irrespective of the myth that the Americans work 52 weeks of the year and we probably only work 45 weeks of the year, but allowing for the fact more that there is 5 days in the week, it's about 5,000 days old the web has existed. And yeah, there was a lot of technology going, it just didn't appear out anywhere. But when we look at the web, 5,000 days, we've achieved an awful lot. Imagine, and this is what my talk is about, what we can achieve in the next 5,000 days. There's an awful lot of argument and discussion as what constitutes this Web 2.0, this Web 3.0. And I'll even go back further saying there's a Web 0. And where the Web 0, in my view, is where they took what Tim Berners-Lee invented at CERN from a cohort of scientists, which says, we can start sharing documents, and it kind of, I suppose, professionalized it. So with the advent of more commercial applications, such as Netscape, you were able to publish and put stuff out there. And it really was, I suppose, a digital view of some of the physical hard copy stuff that you had, whether it was your catalogs, your PR stuff, or your marketing material and so forth. So you're able to take this physical stuff in the analog world and kind of give it a digital manifestation. But it was kind of just that. It was just, again, a digital representation of the physical world, and it was static. It was kind of boring. But from a company's perspective and the authors of this type of stuff, it opened up an incredible audience. And again, from one of a few, and again, that could be very massive or whatever, but to one of kind of infinite eyeballs. And then I think that what I call the Web 1.0 is when we started doing e-commerce, when transactions were able, so the advent of the Amazons and the eBays and so forth, where we could buy stuff, And that's what I would consider kind of the Web 2.0. And again, other people will hang me for my kind of the theory of exactly where I'm still, but it's a very kind of say fluid dynamic. And then this whole kind of, the transactions then led to the fun of Googles and so forth, where we then have kind of in the last 3 years come up with this Web 2.0 type of stuff. And yes, it is marketing kind of say hype and all that goes around it. However, I think the main characterization of this thing called Web 2.0 is the participation of the average user in that they can kind of create communities and put stuff out there. And I think that's the real difference between the Web 0.0 that we started, where you would just publish, to one of participation, to one of crowds and so forth. But I said an awful lot of argument as to exactly what constitutes, and it's very fluid. However, it said, I think as Johnny kind of mentioned, I think earlier, like there are market shakeups, there are bubbles that kind of reflect a lot of that type of stuff. The Netscape IPO, the Google IPO, Facebook, potential IPO, 18 billion valuation, and all of that type of stuff. It might be the start of the end or the start of something new. Who knows? But the thing is, I think there's a lot of good stuff going. And then to kind of add further kind of context to this, in terms of some of the businesses that define each of these types of stuff. The Netscape is this kind of industrial strength, enterprise ready servers and kind of client side that enables you to publish your inventory of documents and manuals and customer stuff and all of that type of stuff. But again, it was kind of static. Then we moved on to the transaction, which is the eBays and the Amazons, and then we moved into the Googles, which kind of freed up, looked at all of this text and said, I can get it to you. And then the hype around the Facebooks, the Flickrs, and the Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, a good characterization between the Web 0 and the Web 2.0 is Encyclopedia Britannica, which, looking at the overall view of the room, I'd say most of us grew up with and used to kind of as source material when we were writing different research projects at school. Wikipedia, it's just phenomenal. It's the contribution of many, and yes, there's inbuilt checks and balances to make it, but nothing characterizes, I think, better the difference between Encyclopedia Britannica and the whole Wikipedia of where we've gone. And again, if you look at that trend line, where we can potentially go. The Flickr, another phenomenal success. Where again, if you want to compare of the old photo that I think Kodak bought out or set up in the Web 0 points, where I loaded up my pictures because I want them to be printed, versus Flickr, I wrote up everything and anything that I ever kind of decide to click on, and then I make it kind of my own and I share it because I can start putting tags on it and so forth to get it out there. But again, from night and day really in terms of kind of say the business models and so forth. And of course you have the kind of the iPhone, which is kind of completely changing and again suggesting a momentum somewhere. Then in terms of technology, and not an awful lot has happened. If you look at it honestly, in the last 15 years and what technology has happened. Tim Berners-Lee says the reason why the web worked day one was because of two simple technologies. HTTP, which basically means this is how I transport the data from A to B, and HTML, which is this is how I present it. Two easy concepts that he managed to do, and then yes, there was the whole network effect and a good group of people that were advocates behind the scientists that then it showed that it could be propagated. But over on the key thing of HTML, the next kind of iteration was XML, sometime in kind of the mid to late 90s, which says, well, I can put a little bit more intelligence around this packet of data as it moves and maybe take a little bit of my dependence of exactly how it can look on the other side. But that was probably the other main innovation that happened. And now the latest one of those is the thing called RDF, which is the next iteration. But I suppose the real, innovation is in terms of the look and feel. Some of the websites today are still very, very ugly. They're a torture to work with. But however, Facebook is an easy interface, but it's based on the kind of, and I don't know whether they use Flash or not, I found that out, but it's the kind of that Flash type of interface, which suggests, good touchy type of thing, and one that I can engage with, and it looks good, it's glossy. And then you have Flex coming on, but they're kind of really putting the kind of the shine on kind of where this technology is going. It means my engagement, my interaction with my users, it can be very, very good. And then in terms of users, as I said, we've gone from the publish and subscribe, and I think in reality, it was punishment with the amount of data that was being shoved down our throat in the Web 0 days, to one now where we're going to participate. And I think this is the trend. Participation is the name of the game in this kind of next 5,000 days that we have to go. The whole idea of open source you know. And open source doesn't mean you can't make money out of it. You know, Linux is an example, and Red Hat then the commercial one about it, where I as a company says, yes, I buy into this Linux thing, but I want my support, but I'm prepared to pay for it. So again, it is one of these kind of dynamics that is changing the way and how people contribute to it. And as online communities, which is kind of parallel to this kind of crowdsourcing, I can have online communities of internal employees, internal teams, specific teams, but also with my customers and even my disaffected customers who are not happy with what I have. But there's all of this, you know, where people are contributing and saying things about me, the company. How do I harness it? And then the whole thing of free. You know, Google has condos into the notion that things are free, and they're not. Somebody ultimately is paying for it. But there's an expectation, especially around kind of the whole newer generation, that things are free, and they put up with a level of stuff that has to be paid for it. But these are all kind of different phenomena that has been accelerating in time. As Johnny in his intro talked about 50 years. We can see that if we kind of did a timeline, and he's writing a story or a book on the timeline of the internet, the history of the internet, we see these frequencies, the frequency at which these things happen to be accelerating. But it suggests this kind of incredible momentum that we're moving somewhere, and we're at this kind of the middle road in 2010, where we've done 15 years and we've 15 years to go. You know, the Android coming out by Google, which means that we're moving away from a PC-dominated view of the world to any device, anywhere, anytime, potentially. You know, the cloud computing, where we're moving, organizations can be freed up to do things. And yes, we've heard that promise before, and yes, we'll hear it again. But there is momentum, this is what I'm suggesting, to suggest that there is things about to change. And, you know, and I think one of the fundamentals of where we are today is the whole idea of real participation. Imagine the power if we could tap into all of the stuff that we knew our employees were doing and our friends and so forth, you know, harness the wisdom of the crowd. This is where I think the momentum is going, to suggest that we're at a point now where, yes, we've 5,000 days done. Imagine all that we've done, but then, likewise, with this momentum of where we can potentially go. And then, you know, kind of a degree of reality, kind of we need to, under the hood, things are as ugly as they ever were. By that I mean is that, you know, and it's best described by this example here of a telegraph pole. You know, there's wires going everywhere to make this thing happen. Yes, in the example of Facebook, it looks very, very clean, but it belies the fact of how ugly it is underneath. It's sledgehammers, it's jackhammers, it's everything to make it work. And things have not changed an awful lot. Yes, our computers have got great at moving data even faster. Yes, we have got some clever applications that try to do it, but ultimately, if you kind of just look at it, a degree of extraction from it, it's ugly on there, and it's staying ugly down there. And yeah, so we need to kind of, you know, maybe put the equivalent of a Cisco box up there that just does things kind of, say, magically. But that's where we need to go. We need to get rid of this ugly telegraph pole with wires coming in everywhere, and, you know, bits of the equivalent of the black tape kind of holding it on, the duct tape holding it on. We need to move involved, and there's my projector held on by black tape there, but that's the reality. You know, once you get down to kind of the gloss of how these things are babysat to make them work and force through things that are happening. Interoperability, you know, it's been a long vision. It hasn't happened. You know, if you have one way of doing things and another way to do it, it doesn't work. We need to kind of move to an environment where interoperability does work. And I suppose one of the things that's more worrying is that when we talk about the whole Web 2.0 environment and this massive participation, it is suggested in the likes of Wikipedia, which again, this phenomenal story, that less than 2% are active contributors to the body, the corpus of knowledge that has been developed there. And that users and all of this type of stuff are far more passive than they are reactive. And an interesting slide here is that suggests that less than 1% of people are really actually contributing it. So that means most of your website is kind of you know, looking for some other type of stuff. So if we take, for instance, and then I suppose the flip side of that, you know, 90% is done by 1% of the people. So we take Facebook as an example, 2 million users, adding 5 million a week or something like that, revenue of 300 million. That means the 2 million is generating the 300 million, and this valuation of 18 billion. You know, figure out the maths. That doesn't kind of grab me very, very much. But again, this is, you know, are we at the, you know, another kind of shakeout or whatever? But if you put on your kind of investment banking hat, those type of numbers are very, very hard to justify if it's just 1 or 2%. can be applied to the kind of, say, Facebook model, and all of the effort over that 1%. And this is where I'm saying we need to get more people participating in it and move from active to passive. And then this says it all. It's not a place for amateurs. And then the picture suggests you need your hard hats on, you need your engineers, you need your labourers, you need your sledgehammers, and you need a very detailed plan to be able to do anything in this web sphere at the moment, in this whole web space. And that's not a good thing. We're all pretty competent people here. We should be able to engage and do a little bit more on the web. But if you want to do that, and if you want to have a nice look and feel to it, you need to know Flash. That's the standard. I have no idea how to write anything in Flash, but I know what I'd like it to do for me. So we need to be able to move that, people with knows how to turn on a computer a little bit more should be able to get out there and participate a little bit more. And then this brings us on to again in perspective that the Web 3.0 is going to happen. And whether we like it or not, it's going to happen because the market demands it. It needs something else to a rallying call to get around, to drive the whole Silicon Valley. And the challenge for us is, do we want more of the same? In other words, the next version of the current type of stuff with all its limitations and ugliness. Or can we do something that's very innovative and something very game-changing? That, I think, the last part is where we should be aiming for, and the type of stuff that I think we can achieve. So we need to move, again, from a place of amateurs, where they're not welcome, to one that they are welcome. So I'm not saying that everyone will be able to create the most fancy of websites, but if I so choose, I should be able, with the minimum amount of instruction, be able to get things going. We need to move from participation of say passive to active and productive. Again, imagine if we could harness all of the energy of our staff to be able to know it, rather than the few that's driving it, somehow or another be able to attack and grab into that say tacit knowledge. Where we move from less than 1%, so that we have mass productivity or mass contributions rather than just the few. Where interoperability is intermodal, and the best way to describe that is some of our European cities. Take Frankfurt for example. You fly in on a plane. High-speed trains are available just outside the door, as are the local ones. Incredible highway system, and yet there's bicycle lanes just up the road if you want to jump off the plane and go on a bike ride. This type of intermodal type of stuff is something that we need to get going in the technology world, so that no matter what your delivery or transport system, no matter what your way of working is, that you can easily move between modes of this kind of data. And then we move from this very, very ugly data world into one where integration does work. And the essence of it is that we move from this ugly under the hood to an elegant engineered solution. So not just where the wires are that embarrass you when you look into it, but there's a neat engineering solution. And this brings up the thing that it's really all about data. We don't need smarter and faster computers. They are very, very smart computers and very, very fast computers. And we don't need necessarily artificial intelligence, because that's assuming that the computer can do a lot of fancy stuff in ways that has failed. What we need is that as data is being created in whatever milieu, in whatever part of the life cycle or transaction or environment, that as it's being created, that somehow or another we can put some machine-readable smarts on it. So at the point of creation, smarts come in, and this whole smarts is where this thing called semantic comes in. It's where that there's meaning, machine-readable meaning put in. And yes, it depends on context and depends on so forth, on domains and all of that type of stuff. But it means that we're moving from a dumb data world to one that's a smart data world. And if you put it in context, look at all that we've achieved with dumb data, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons and so forth. Imagine the potential if they were working off smart data. And I think this is where we have to be optimistic. So we move, again, from the dumb data to smart data. Maybe then we can achieve some phenomenal stuff in the next 5,000 days that we're working on. And one of the articles I read recently was saying that data is the new Intel inside. So smarter data is the whole industry turned upside down and made forward. So this is the real takeaway, I think, that of where we're at the point. If we want to not just have a marketing hype Web 3.0, but move on to the next, we need to move from dumb data to smart data and then go forward. And solving the data, this moving from dumb data to creating the smart data, I think we have a two-pronged approach. We need fundamental research done to invent newer ways of doing this type of stuff. But at the same time, as things are kind of being freed up and made better through kind of advanced research, like the stuff that Science Foundation Ireland invests in, Enterprise Ireland, and the IIEA is working with their companies, as we do that type of stuff, at the same time, the market is going to react to the availability of that type of thing. And then this is where really something symbiotic is going to happen, and that we can move on to the potential of this incredible world going forward. So again, we need to very, very much be involved in this innovation invention in terms of all of our PhDs that we're doing here, all of the advanced research, making Ireland an attractive place for all of these very bright scientists from all over the world to come here and say, we can crack this problem. We've got the critical mass, just as we have down in DERI, to be able to have enough of people to crack this problem. And yes, there are different ways of trying to solve this problem, but we think there's some incredible opportunity. And then when you bring on the stuff, marketing is going to happen anyway, whether we like it or not. What we want to do is say, can we bring it to something that's very, very cool and creative? The inventor of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, has been kind of espousing the virtues of the semantic web for quite a long time. About 2000, 2001, I came up with, after having invented the web, says, what's next? And this is what I suppose is technology stack, and it's called kind of the semantic cake of where he wants this to do. But in reality, if you look at this, we've only really scratched the surface here of where the vision of this kind of semantic web is. We have a lot of work to do in it. But it means that there is this roadmap, open standards, all of that type of stuff, which suggests. But the phenomenon of the Web 2.0 that we know now at the moment is just really down here. So again, if we look at all of that we've achieved in terms of market dominance, market participation, and market dynamics, there's a long, long way to go. But again, all we can see is opportunity, and to be optimistic about it. DERI is also kind of working to try and do its piece to eating the cake and making the cake and putting the ingredients in to create a big cake. And so when I'm out talking to kind of industry, I've kind of taken the liberty of putting something kind of very MBA-ish up, which suggests that most people can kind of feel at home in it. But whether you're a company or a government agency or whatever, you have products and services that you want to sell to your customer. And our focus is 3 areas of research that cross that whole product and service continuum. The first area is in terms of integration and interoperability. And there are 2 aspects to that. As I mentioned previously, computers are great at moving data at phenomenal speeds from A to B, but it knows nothing about the data. And again, imagine the power if it did. And then this is where this whole semantic, because it means meaning, the meaning of the data. So at the date, and again, there's 2 aspects. One of, at a transaction kind of say layer, so packets of data running around in routers. As that data is being created, we need to put relevant information there that computers can know. So an example would be in, say, a financial services environment. The businesses, the relationship guy is saying, this client, whoever he is or she, when they have a transaction over a certain value, I want kid glove treatment on it for whatever reason, a business reason, And then this is codified into it. So when a transaction comes into the transaction environment, this trade, say stock shares or something on the stock exchange, this is how I want it to do. It comes in, and as soon as it's encapsulated in digital format, we put, customer A, dollar amount or euro amount. Now, as it moves along through its life cycle, because it has to be transacted, the computers, the routers, the transaction environment says, I'm going to do this differently from anyone else. Yes, all of the rest has to happen. That's the area of, that's what we need to be able to do, so that the routers, the computers, the business applications and so forth know that or reflect the business reality. To do that today is next to impossible, except by brute force. And even that is quite limited. So again, if we can capture and put in at the time of the data creation in whatever the environment it is, so machine readable meaning, we call semantics, to make the data, take the data from done to smart, we can open up incredible stuff that can happen with that data set. Then the other part of not the packet of data is around the text of data. And some suggest that 80% of the data in a large company is all kind of this unstructured free format type of stuff. But what we need to be able to do is that if I've got a text or a concept, say in an email here, how can I go out and look at my other repositories of information, where there is customer management systems, where there is purchase orders, where there's marketing material, and link them up together. So company name here, something over there, or a purchase over there, invoice here, or a product number here. All of those types of stuff that we can, depending on the context of the conversation, like if I do PO out of context, nobody knows what it is, or if I do invoice out of context. But within context, so we humans are great at filtering out and narrowing it down. Says, oh, purchase order, invoice, opposite side of the same things. And within certain environments it makes sense. And I have product and I have sub-product and all of that type of stuff. So what we need to do is build meaning, context relevant and machine readable meaning on these type of things that make sense from a business perspective, not a technology up or technology down or business up and business down, but wherever it makes sense, so that I can link this. And not alone that, is that I can, and it's independent of language and all of that type of stuff. This is where I say the real power is it. But where it really means is that we're kind of moving from this kind of a data-dictated world which we live in today. We've learned to conform. Computers haven't learned from us yet. And we need to move from that, again, a data-dictated world to one that's kind of a data-rich but a user-driven, so it can anticipate. And what I've painted there, by the way, is world hunger. This is a hard problem. There's an awful lot of ways of trying to do it, but we have to keep that, and this is what we have to do. And I think if we get that there, then we'll move on to moving data to information. And then the application of that information becomes real knowledge. And then that can be circled back down again to a higher level data. And we've all sold this in industry for the last, I don't know, many years, that this is the holy grail. But I do think we're now at a point where if you can take data and bring it up to a higher utility, then it becomes information. Then the use of that becomes knowledge. And then we bring it back down again, richer, but still data, information, and knowledge. And then I think the real vision is imagination, that we can use all of this. So we kind of sticky data, information, knowledge, imagination. That's way out there, but this is the vision and the power of what we can do. So we want to enable imagination, and again, not constrain it or not hold it back. And one of the underlying kind of, I suppose, concepts when we talk about getting this meaning is and that's the fundamental building block of this thing called semantics, is the notion of concepts. And it's independent of technology or it's independent of data or whatever. And the best example maybe is to say a concept around a city. So let's take New York as an example. So we can create a concept, a city, and or we call it whatever. But we decided that we agreed that this is a concept, so we call it New York. And we hang New York off this concept that we've all agreed is a city. And we can then hang other stuff that there's the 5 boroughs. And it's part of a larger state which is also called New York. And it's also part of a country called the United States of America. And it may or may not, and all these other attributes. And that's great. There's kind of this tree of information and going that's hanging around this one thing called concepts. Previous kind of things would say, let's hang around a thing called a state, and it's kind of basically hard-coded. But the beauty of the thing about that is then that I can then apply it to different languages. So I can put a French version of it straight away without ever, kind of nullifying what has gone previously. I can hang off the French version of New York and whatever all these attributes. Likewise, Irish, we can call it New Auruk, and it doesn't invalidate the original concept of a thing called city and apply it right across. So this concept then is kind of technology and data independent, but it means that it can scale and people can do it, but it's subject matter kind of say experts. And this thing then, this kind of concept, machine readable concept then brings this notion of ontologies, which is something you hear an awful lot in a thing called semantics. You hear this thing called RDF, which is that kind of concept graph that I talk, and then ontologies. And ontologies really, dumbed down, means a machine readable dictionary. And it comes from the notion of, depending on, especially in life sciences, people are very good at classifying the material that they have and what they're doing. They're used to classifications. And they use the word kind of taxonomy there. And the phenomenon of Flickr has brought in a thing called folksonomies, which means that another classification, but as folk, as in the German word kind of say people, is people-derived use of the word. So I can, again, have a picture of a dog. I may call it cute, you may call it ugly, but it doesn't validate. I can search on either one and get the same. And this is where the folksonomy, but then to bring in a little bit more structure, machine-readable, computer-based ontologies, which is, again, a machine-readable dictionary with rules in it and associations and so forth, means that it can scale. And another kind of, I suppose, key aspect of it that you hear a thing called semantics is kind of these things called facets. So if you're thinking, again, the data that we have today is very rough and ready. Likewise with diamonds, when you take a diamond out of the ground, it needs an awful lot of work. It's a rough, rugged, and nobody quite knows whether it's going to sparkle or not. But the ultimate diamond has multiple facets. And, depending on how good the facets are, naturally the value of it. Same with this data. We've all of this massive amounts of data, but with these concepts and ontologies, we can start building these facets. Because my view of the data might be very different view from yours, just as if you think of a company. Our marketing person's view of their language that they use is very different from a salesperson, from a product person, from an engineering person, from the accounting. Yet it all hangs around the same bunch of data sets, but different facets, different interpretations. So again, this idea of ontologies and so forth and concepts enable this multifaceted view of an organization. And some of the things that we've been working on to try and build these ontologies and concepts around the 3 areas that we've done. The first one, again, around these packets of data is the speed around through routers and computers and so forth. There's this big science, European Union funded kind of projects around trying to make sense, build these ontologies, and it's called WSMIX, and which is machine or web services modeling, and there's an ontology, there's a language, and there's an execution environment. However, I'll reference one where we've taken that kind of broad concept and applied it to healthcare, and I'll talk about that in a little few minutes. And then around the unstructured data, we have a thing called kind of say SHUC, which is the Irish for kind of say frosting. It came from John Breslin was the inventor, but Stefan Decker, our German lead, is the first word his daughter learned in school, in Irish school, was Schnachte, which is Irish for snow. And they put in an application, again, if you think of the snow and kind of, you know, how each snowflake can kind of intertwine, which I think is a very good metaphor for all of this data we're trying to connect. Anyway, we put it in a project, Enterprise Ireland, which failed, and then we brought on the next iteration, and he says, well, we can't call it Schnachte again, it's snow, so we call it frost. So this is where the whole kind of concept of SHUC came out. But it means semantically interlinked online communities, and it does show kind of say what we're trying to achieve. We also have this concept of folk, friend of a friend. So how can I describe myself in again a machine readable way? So this, you know, I might have, you know, things about my address, my telephone numbers, my date of birth. I might have a profile that's just family only or friends only versus my corporate persona versus all of these other things. So how do I kind of, again, have these multifacets or multiple facets around the same concept called be a person? And then there's one around knowledge ontologies, in other words, the data within an organization and tags. But this is all, say, some of the ontologies, some of the kind of the building blocks that we have and that we're developing in DERI. And these are only just a small snapshot of it, that we're trying to get stuff from all of this kind of dumb data into a smart data. Again, it's not smart computers, it's putting smarts into the data so they can kind of take up and move on. Tim Berners-Lee and the World Wide Web Consortium have this kind of visual to try and show kind of in terms of enterprise, and if you take, you know, the plumbing example that I used in terms of the integration that we were doing previously, this is kind of a subway version where you can get on anywhere and get off anywhere, and you may have different gauges. They may not quite like the Lewis kind of quite hook up, but there's some way of getting from A to B. And this is the reality, you know, it doesn't have to be quite, you know, kind of bang, 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 kind of all real time. It can be asynchronous. But again, in terms of, again, concepts or visuals, trying to figure out what this is. Again, world hunger that we're trying to achieve there. But all kind of say relevant if we can get them to do it. And we won't get it just by kind of the sledgehammer job, which is the way we've done it before. But it's at the relevant point in along. And there's so many life cycles and data cycles here, but at the right time, at the point that it makes most sense, and that we put kind of, this is what it means, this is the concept, this is here. And then as it moves along, there's more stuff added. So we build this inventory. In one way is if you go back to the Japanese Kaban manufacturing system, at each key stage along the manufacturing, you've got to swipe. And so at the end of the manufacturing place, you could go, has it gone through all of these checkpoints? And you had an visual inventory of the manufacturing process. Apply the same dynamic to this thing, digital, where you're flying all around the place. But at each critical point, judged by you, not by the computer, that says, I want to kind of annotate it further so as to be richer and smarter, relevant to the context. So it goes from data creation to consumption and destruction, because we mightn't want it anymore. Stefan Decker, our lead researcher, often puts up this picture of where he wants to go in the next 5,000 days. And, you know, picture the world, there's so many kind of bits and bobs out there generating data. What we want to do is kind of bag and tag it, so that machine readable data relevant in its life cycle to come, so that we create this kind of completely networked view of the world. So we have everyone is connected, every device. So we move from a PC-dominated centric world to, if it's producing data, I want to be able to know about it and do something with it. And again, you know, it kind of against it, it will help for this data information, knowledge, imagination, because we want imagination to work everywhere. And what we want to do is build the infrastructure to make that happen. And you know, kind of that we kind of knit all of this together in this whole kind of say knowledge, kind of in a context, kind of an appropriate and kind of say personalized way. This is very, very important. But the intelligence in there. So again, at the time of creation, time of consumption, and the time of destruction, that we would get that type of stuff. So then we need to kind of say move on to kind of where some of all of the potential of this is happening and where it's kind of say going. And I've taken the kind of the liberty of kind of looking at a few of these. And the first one is in terms of citizens, and since we're kind of a European think tank here, well, what does it mean, this kind of next 5,000 days in terms of us citizens? And I suppose the first one is saying we have to ask the question, is all of this going to make us smarter or more stupider? And because we have a reliance of all this type of data here, you know, will we, and it adds kind of to the next one, you know, we need critical thinkers, but we'll kind of cut them. And I use a very strong word here called plagiarism. I'm not using any plagiarism. But there's an incredible, I think, reliance on cutting and pasting and thinking as original thought. You know, we need our employees and our staff and the people who are coming up through our school systems and the universities to be critical thinkers. If we want to be a knowledge economy, and this is a European-wide phenomenon, global phenomenon, we need to make sure that the policies and procedures we put in place and the maturity that we as managers have will make sure that we maintain that kind of critical thinking. Because if not, we go back to being dumb, and that's not a good thing. I think, you know, there's a sense of, you know, are we more connected or more isolated? And again, these are kind of things I don't have the answers for, but it draws up interesting questions. You know, the modern phenomenon is that, you know, we do want to live in an isolated world, yet we want to be connected. And is this making us more connected or less connected? More isolated or less isolated? And again, it depends. For some it is, and for others it isn't. You know, the whole passive and active participation, you know, and especially in terms of citizenry and democracy, you know, how can we get people more engaged? How can we tap into the views of those so that we know what's going on kind of down there and out in the streets and so forth? The whole idea of privacy, because of this is opening up, have we more privacy or less? Well, it depends. But these are things that we need to be kind of thinking about. Again, this whole engagement and disengagement, franchise and disenfranchised, these are things that we need to address and think about. It will be enabled by technology, but is it a good thing or a bad thing, and how we address it and how we think about it as policy makers? These are some things that we need to think about, whether we're corporations or whatever, but dealing with people and with customers. So again, I've kind of thrown out things just to kind of more stir thought rather than having any profound answers for it. In terms of kind of corporate and kind of government and organisations, and I've grouped them together because we are kind of working with kind of both employees, with customers or citizens or whatever, but it brings up a whole kind of set of kind of concerns for it. And I think one of the critical ones, managers, whether you're low-level managers, senior-level managers, we need to change. The technology will enable us to change, but do we want to give up the control and command and control kind of philosophy that has made some of us very, very successful, but it means that with this type of technology that's coming in the Semantic Web over the next kind of 5,000 days, that we may need to open up into kind of one that is kind of more collaboration. That means we have to give up, we have to trust. And yes, the technology should be able to come along to kind of help us monitor that type of stuff. But it's a little bit scary because we're used to these tools. But, you know, as the millennia kind of come in, the under 25s or whatever, and as they start very shortly kind of snapping at our heels and taking over our jobs and so forth, they're a lot more used and more comfortable at this kind of collaboration. And yeah, we still need kind of corporate controls and all of that type of stuff, but it's a different way of kind of thinking. Transparency is going to be kind of a big thing, and openness across the value chain. You know, we can't have another Madoff kind of coming on. And of course there will happen, but we need the technology to be able to start kind of looking at some of the kind of unregulated world, or they have the capability, if people decide, well, how do we tap into and see what's kind of going on. And you know, so these are some of the things that the command and control have to kind of change. this whole idea of IT as utility. You know, when you're looking at a new office built out or whatever, you don't worry about the electricity, but you do have to worry about IT. So, you know, kind of, and we need to get away from that. You know, the economics of it, or, you know, there was a very interesting article in the Financial Times the week before last, where it says the cost of a monthly gigabyte of data in a data center with 1,000 servers was just over $2. But a data center with 50,000 servers is 40 cents. You know, CFO is looking at this, they have to say, you know, this doesn't make sense. So competence, you know, if you can do stuff cheaper, like some arguments suggest that Google's competitive advantage now is in its data center, and the secrets of how it manages all this data and so forth is really its competitive advantage. You know, because nobody really going into that space can just manage the engineering that they have been able to do, even if they copied all the page rank algorithms and so forth, and, you know, we're able to, the way that they're able to manage all of this amount of data is the real competitive advantage. But I said, like, you know, I mean, I think as you know, IT is utility, and going back to kind of electricity, you know, some places do need three-phase electricity, and they pay for it, and other ones need kind of high, you know, availability and awful lots of it, but you pay for it, depending on your circumstances. But again, if we're setting up a business, you know, we have to think about this type of stuff. And eventually we have to get away from that. It just happens. Yeah, we'll pay for it, and there'll be service level agreements, and there'll be controls and all to make it happen. But that's a different type of stuff. And kind of lower cost, I think, is one of the things when we can experiment with the cloud. I don't need to buy a box to set up a test case to go out there and kind of create the next social network. I can buy it off Amazon, buy my credit card. So, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm only out a couple of hundred or something like that. But the ability, and even if I'm a large company, I just want to test something. Before, you had to go and order a box or 2 or 3, which only made the hardware vendors rich, not you, because you spend all your money on hardware when you should have been trying to say, how can I tap it into kind of this crowdsourcing to say, is this work, is this something that you want to do? So again, the lower costs, if we can sort out the data problem underneath, if we can move from dumb data to smarter data, will mean that my organisation and our organisations, whether it's corporate or whether it's government or policy or so forth, will be able to engage and experiment and kind of get out there to try and see what has happened. The whole engagement with communities, how do I tap into my internal teams, my customers, my disaffected customers? One of the biggest challenges, you know, you can be flamed so quickly now on the internet, but likewise you can get out there and penetrate and put positive things so quickly. So, you know, these are, you know, things that we have to deal with. And then the whole idea of green is that, and again, if you can shove your operating data centers from inside where it's costing you an awful lot of money, out there where people can deal with it kind of as their core competencies, where they can address some of these green issues and have, you know, follow the moon strategies and all of this type of stuff, it means that we can look at this thing called green and not from kind of just but its potential. And then one of the areas I'd like to bring up is the idea of kind of custodians. And, you know, people are going to entrust us with knowledge, and the best way to describe this is in the area of my personal health records. I might want to give it to a doctor, and I'm entrusting him to do it, but I also say that he can give it to some of his clinicians, and he may be able to share some of that with my insurance company, whether that's private or government, but not other stuff, because I don't want to be have a biased opinion on what the rate. But the technology will be able to come, or should come in the next kind of 5,000 days, where I can say, this is all you can do with my data. And by the way, if I move to another country within a few, I want to bring my data with me, my medical data with me. And here are the rules based on the regulatory environments of that I want to apply. But a phenomenal concept of where technology will enable this kind of custodial view, but in terms of policy and so forth, major questions. And then we need to figure out kind of uptake. How do we get the average Joe to make this thing happen? And it will if we move from dumb data to smarter data, where they don't have to think about kind of, you know, putting in an electricity unit just to make their house run. And sure, and there's certain instances where, you know, you have blackouts and so forth. And then in terms of commercialization, you know, the internet was invented in Europe, commercialized in America. We need to try and figure out how we can do that. And I forgot to say at the beginning, the whole concept of the Web 2.0 was invented by an Irish guy, a Cork guy, Tim O'Reilly, out of San Francisco. So there's kind of a good Irish kind of say connection here. But in terms of commercialization, we have the European Union through its framework programs. SFI have pumped an awful lot of money into it. The opportunity and challenge for us is how do we make the uptick in commercialization of that. And just a quick type of thing, some of the interesting technologies that we're creating at DERI. One is called envisages, which is if you were building a big application or an application you wanted this embedded search engine, semantic search engine, that is it and is available. Swizzy is this massive semantic web search engine. Corral is a large database of knowledge where we're and the finalists for a very large competition where we beat Stanford and a whole bunch of other people on doing some very cool semantic web stuff. Notitious, basically delicious on steroids with this thing called Semantic. Samantha is an Outlook, and for my Microsoft colleagues around the table here, is the application of semantics in an Outlook environment to really kind of do stuff. Mars is about to be spun out, and Laurencio, who is about fourth in the back there, is going to pull this technology out in terms of a startup very, very shortly. And then just some of the other ones, technology called Pepper. Remember when I was talking about the packets of data moving around and this thing called Wismix? We're the first people in the world to apply semantics in terms of interoperability in hospital care systems. So the generic kind of hospital interface is a thing called HL7 is the standard, and version 2.2, 2.5 is the common one. Version 3 is coming, and they're not backward compatible at all. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, we've cracked it, and we're the first in the world to get this thing to work. We're launching a pilot with a matter here up the road from you. I think it's not very, very far. Next month with a company called SlidePath here in Dublin. Very exciting, first in the world to the application of semantics in terms of integration. The next area is the application of this whole idea of friends of a friend to the notion of fair use. So when I buy a book today, I can read it and give it to my wife and my friends and so forth. And eventually it gets things so battered anyway that nobody can use it. But there's this whole kind of concept called fair use management in the analog physical world, that when they're trying to do it in the digital world, it's a sledgehammer job, all or nothing, heavy digital rights management, which kind of doesn't enable this fair use concept. We've developed a patent, or a technology that we've patented, which enables this fair rights fair rights management over digital content. Very, very excited about it. And then the piece de resistance that we have at the moment, the White House announced last week that they're getting all of their information available in terms of the recovery, and the technology invented Shuck, this Frost thing, is going to be, all of their data is going to be Shuck enabled, which is a phenomenal success story for us in DERI. So that means that there will be kind of a machine readable way of interpreting all of the data that's involved in coming out of the White House. And you can imagine the volumes and volumes and volumes of data, but it'll help people. And how it's going to be used by people, we don't know. But the key thing is that when the data is being generated, it's going to be Shuck enabled for then people to launch and create whatever they want after it. So that's my what better note to kind of finish off in after going down and spending an incredible week here in Europe and getting us to love America again, and the fact that at the same time that he was in Europe, they also announced that they were putting Shuck, a technology invented by at DERI, is a great story.